Marcus arrived at the restaurant with his heart beating harder than he wanted to admit. The place felt warmer than he expected, soft golden lights, holiday garlands hanging from the ceiling, slow Christmas music drifting around the room like it belonged in a movie. He had ironed his only good shirt twice before leaving the house, and the memory of his little girl cheering, "Daddy, you look handsome," still lingered in his mind. He wanted this to be a fresh start, a chance to step out of the lonely routine he'd been stuck in since the breakup. He sat at the table, hands clasped, trying to calm the nerves running up his spine. When his blind date arrived, he stood quickly, offering a warm smile, the kind that shows sincerity without trying too hard. She returned a smile, but hers was thin, hesitant, like she was already second-guessing being there. They exchanged a few polite introductions, but Marcus could feel her eyes drifting away from him, scanning the room as if searching for an escape. He tried to keep the conversation alive, mentioning his job, his daughter, anything to bridge the awkward silence forming between them. Within minutes, she reached for her purse, avoiding his eyes. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're nice, really nice. I just don't think this is going to work." She didn't offer a reason, didn't need to. Her tone already carried the truth. He wasn't what she imagined, and she didn't want to stay long enough to see if he could be. She pushed her chair back and stood, leaving behind a glass with a lipstick mark and an ache heavier than the one he came in with. Marcus watched her walk out, the door opening to a gust of cold air and swirling snow. He stayed still for a moment, trying not to let the sting show on his face. He told himself it was fine, that it didn't matter, but it did. He felt it in his chest, that quiet, familiar hurt of being dismissed before anyone truly knew him. And in the middle of the festive, glowing restaurant, filled with laughter and couples celebrating Christmas Eve, he suddenly felt like the loneliest man in the room. Marcus let out a slow breath and sank deeper into his chair, feeling the fabric press against his back like a reminder he couldn't escape. The restaurant around him felt louder, now laughing couples, clinking glasses, soft carols playing overhead. Somehow he felt completely disconnected from all of it. He tried to straighten up, pretending the rejection didn't bother him, but the truth settled heavily in his chest. It wasn't just the date falling apart. It was the feeling that no matter how hard he tried, he was always a step behind what people wanted. He glanced down at the untouched wine in front of him. He had ordered it to calm his nerves, imagining he'd share a toast with someone who maybe, just maybe, would see him for who he was. Instead, it became a symbol of the moment he was left behind again. He ran his thumb along the stem of the glass, feeling the coldness of it, wishing he could numb his thoughts in the same way. The waiter approached with a sympathetic look, offering to bring the check, but Marcus forced a smile and waved him off politely. He wasn't ready to stand yet, to walk out and face the winter air with this quiet failure sitting on his shoulders. He leaned back and stared out the window. Snow was drifting down in slow, delicate flakes, catching the glow of the streetlights outside. The beauty of it hit him with a strange ache. Everything seemed to move with purpose, except him. In the glass, he saw his own reflection faintly mirrored back. A man in his 30s, with tired eyes and a heart that still wanted to try, even when trying hurt. He thought about the promises he made to himself after his breakup to heal, to grow, to believe love wasn't something only other people found. Tonight made that promise feel harder to keep. He lifted his hand to massage the tension in his neck, letting out a deep sigh as he finally pushed his chair back. Around him, couples leaned in close, sharing quiet conversations, holding hands. exchanging gifts wrapped in shiny paper. It was a scene that should have felt warm, joyful, alive. Instead, Marcus felt like a silhouette moving through a world that didn't have a place for him with slow steps. He began to walk away from the table, hoping the cold air outside would wash away the sting he couldn't quite shake off. But just as he reached for his coat, something stirred inside him, a faint whisper of hope, or maybe just the exhaustion of carrying everything alone. Whatever it was, it kept him standing there for a moment longer, unaware that fate was about to change everything in the next breath. Marcus had just slid one arm into his coat when a sudden scraping sound cut through the restaurant's soft music. A chair pushed back hard. The noise was sharp enough that he glanced up out of instinct. That's when he saw her. A woman at a nearby table stood so quickly that people around her turned to look. She wasn't angry, but something in her posture, tense shoulders, clenched jaw, eyes burning with a mix of shock and hurt, made it clear she had just seen something she didn't expect. Her gaze wasn't wandering. It was locked on Marcus, as if he were the only steady thing in the whole room. He blinked, confused, wondering if she needed help, if he'd somehow unknowingly stepped into someone else's moment. She took a breath, one sharp inhale that looked like she was trying to gather herself before she fell apart. Then she started walking toward him, not hesitating, not breaking eye contact. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, each step measured, determined, almost desperate. Marcus froze. He wasn't used to people approaching him like that, especially strangers. But she didn't slow down. She reached him with a kind of urgent grace, stopping just inches away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The warmth of the restaurant hummed around them, but everything else felt suspended, like the world had gone quiet just for them. Then, without warning, she lifted her hands and gently cupped his face, tilting it up so he had no choice but to meet her eyes. Her touch wasn't rough or inappropriate, it was searching, grounding, as if she was holding on to him to keep herself from collapsing. Marcus stiffened, startled, unsure what was happening, but there was something in her expression that kept him from pulling away. Her eyes were glossy, almost shimmering under the restaurant lights. They weren't the eyes of a flirt or someone looking for attention. They were the eyes of someone hurt, someone trying to look strong but failing just slightly at the edges. Marcus could feel her breath brushing his skin, uneven and shaky, like she'd rushed through a storm to get to him. "You," she whispered, not yet finishing her thought. Her voice cracked, barely audible. She blinked fast, glancing over her shoulder for just a second, just long enough for Marcus to see a man sitting across the room with another woman, laughing, completely oblivious to the effect he had left behind. When she turned back to Marcus, her eyes hardened with resolve. She leaned in a little closer, her hands steadying on his jaw, as if he were the only anchor in a suddenly shifting world. Marcus didn't understand what she wanted, why she chose him, a stranger still nursing the sting of his own rejection. But for the first time all night, someone was looking at him really, looking at him, not past him, not through him, and he felt something shift. A small crack in the loneliness that had wrapped itself around his heart. Before he could even open his mouth. She leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried a strange urgency and vulnerability that made Marcus's chest tighten. "Can you be my new husband?" The words sounded impossible, absurd, even coming from a complete stranger. He blinked, stunned, certain she was joking, but when he looked into her eyes, he saw something that made him pause, something raw, pleading, a flicker of desperation wrapped in hope. She rushed on, almost tripping over her words, explaining that her ex-fiancé had just entered the restaurant with another woman, and she refused to let him see her alone, shattered or defeated. She needed anyone to help her keep a semblance of dignity in that moment. And there was something in Marcus that made her believe he could be that person. Something steady, kind, a presence that felt solid and real. Marcus should have laughed, maybe brushed it off as a ridiculous proposition. Yet instead he found himself nodding, surprising even himself. Perhaps it was because he recognized in her eyes the same kind of heartbreak he carried quietly in his own heart. The ache of loss, loneliness, and longing for connection. And in that shared, silent understanding, a fragile trust began to form. One that neither of them could have anticipated just minutes ago. ChatGPT said. They sat together, letting the tension of the moment slowly ease into something warmer, softer. At first, it was all pretending, holding hands a little too tightly, exchanging shy smiles, and making up inside jokes as though they'd known each other for years. But with every laugh that escaped her, every quiet, attentive glance she gave when he spoke about his daughter, the lines between acting and feeling began to blur. Marcus found himself leaning in, listening more closely, noticing the little ways she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way her eyes brightened when she laughed at something small and silly. The warmth between them grew naturally, unforced, a gentle kind of connection neither of them had expected to find in a crowded restaurant. When her ex finally noticed them, she squeezed Marcus's hand knot as part of the charade, but in a way that spoke of gratitude and relief, a silent acknowledgement of the comfort she'd found. By the time Desert arrived, the playful pretense had melted into something real, something fragile but undeniable. She leaned closer, her voice soft, almost shy, and whispered, "I know I asked you as a joke, but meeting you feels like the first real thing I've had in a long time." Marcus felt a warmth bloom inside him, a mixture of surprise, hope, and something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. In that small, quiet corner of the restaurant, surrounded by clinking glasses and muted chatter, two lonely hearts had found a moment that felt entirely their own, and neither wanted it to end.